Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to what will be our final session of summer school before Moot Court tomorrow. I hope you're all raring to go for the panellists that are to come. I'll hand over to your chair for the session in just a moment, but I wanted to make a couple of brief announcements for some important information, in particular for this afternoon's barbecue or this evening's barbecue. So actually, before I get to that, I will tell you that there are still some copies of an easy-to-read programme available at our registration desk, just in case anybody wanted one to take home and didn't take it, in case anybody else needed it. We actually do have a few copies left over, so that's available at the front desk. And then about the barbecue, the thing we've all been looking forward to all week, I think, and that we've been graced with some Galway sunshine for, I hope. The bus will leave here at 5:15 p.m. and people we can gather out here outside the ILAS building. There will be also an accessible bus, and if anybody needs to use an accessible space in the bus or needs to avail of this, but you haven't already told us, please do come to us at the registration desk and let us know. Then the bus will also bring us back here, back to the ILAS building and to Goldcrest after the barbecue, and we'll be leaving the venue or gathering everybody up to get back on the bus at 8:15. If you don't want to lift back, if you've decided that you want to explore Salt Hill and go into town, enjoy more of Galway, that is totally okay. And in fact, we encourage you, if it's a lovely evening, to do some of that if you have energy left after a full week of summer school. But please do tell us, so we'll make sure that we're not holding the bus or waiting for you, especially if you got the bus there. Some logistical bits about the venue then and the actual space where the barbecue will be held. Unfortunately, there's only one public accessible bathroom at the hotel that will be available to you. So to sort this or mitigate this a little bit, we have arranged for an accessible bedroom, so a room with an accessible bathroom, to be available to our delegates during the barbecue. And you can access this, so you have a second bathroom to access by asking for a key at the front desk. But please make sure to return the key to the desk after you have used it, so other people can also avail of the space. The accessible bathroom is the one that is publicly available, is on the ground floor of the hotel, through the main entrance of it. The venue that we will be using is on the lower ground floor, so you will have to come in through a lift if you come in through the main door. The other thing that I should say about the lower ground floor is that there is a car park space actually just at this level, and we have arranged for a number of accessible or blue badge spaces and a couple of other extra spaces just in case at this level. So if you are driving to the barbecue and you do have a vehicle with you this week, we'd encourage you to use that lower car park space because it's actually a much easier route to get in. I'm really looking forward to this evening, but first I am very much looking forward to the panel, and I am going to hand you over to your chair for this afternoon, Eleanor Walsh, and who will introduce you to the topic and our speakers.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back after lunch to this afternoon's panel on participation in cultural life, recreation, leisure and sport. My name is Eleanor Walsh. I'm an autistic and neurodivergent actor, performer and advocate, and I'm chairing the panel this afternoon. Thank you so much to the summer school for having me. Firstly, we're going to have three different presentations. Firstly, Brady Hughes from Galway Community Circus, then Nina Portalon from ENIL Youth Network and a para-athlete will be joining us remotely. And then I'm going to introduce and present a short film called Echoes Bones. And then myself, Brady and Nina remotely will be joined for a Q&A by George Weldon and Elle Cronley, two of the young people involved in the making of Echoes Bones. And we'll take some questions from you all. I'll have some questions for them, and it'll be really nice. And then we'll send you off to the barbecue. So without any further ado, I'll introduce our first presenter. Brady Hughes is a recreation therapist from Canada. He came to Galway with his partner last year. Before moving, he worked for the Centre for Autism Services Alberta for 8 years, and there he facilitated many types of support programs, from job skill and independent living preparation to summer camps and leisure programming. Here in Ireland, he works for the Galway Community Circus as their head of circus school, supporting their youth and social circus programming. At GCC, he is supporting the organisation's work towards its goal of further developing its inclusive circus education model to be shared throughout Ireland, which is very exciting. And I'll hand you over to Brady. Thank you so much.
Hello, nice to see you all here. I'll let you know I'm just a little bit nervous because I haven't done public speaking in a while, but I will do my best to talk slowly. So I'm going to chat a little bit about how at Galway Community Circus, and I'll reference it as GCC a lot because it's a mouthful, kind of what we're doing to support and improve our capacity for inclusion with youth in our circus programming. So to start, I need to provide you a little bit of context. So I run into a lot of people, and not a lot of people know kind of what youth circus is. And youth circus is a very specific model that it's a circus arts education program that uses what we call contemporary circus arts skills to provide an alternative activity to young people that is creative, physical, and non-competitive. So a lot of what people understand about circus is what we call traditional circus, about the traveling circus shows, sideshows, use of animals. So that's what we title traditional circus. We don't do animals, so we do contemporary circus, which focuses on the performance art through the use of traditional circus disciplines and newer age circus disciplines. And often when you go see a contemporary circus show, it'll tell you a story rather than displaying unusual abilities or a mastery of a skill. So it's taking the skills, focusing on the skills, and telling a story or sending a message or emoting some sort of feeling through the performance of circus arts. So we use circus arts to teach people the tools to develop self-confidence, resilience, and social skills. So that's the key part of what a youth circus program does, is we're using circus as a tool for improving well-being. And at the same time, we're going to try and tap into some of our participants' strengths and maybe uncover some really neat hidden talents that might be just kind of like under the surface they're hiding. So to give you some examples of the kind of circus skills our circus teaches, we've got static trapeze. So it's a trapeze that doesn't move. So they're not flying, they're not swinging back and forth and jumping from one trapeze to another. They're doing some pretty cool stuff on one that's rigged on a point. They do some neat things. I am not a circus performer or artist, so I'm giving you the boring stuff, but it is pretty cool to watch. We also do aerial hoop. We do acrobatics, tight wire, various balancing props. So like what we call a rollabola. So it's like a skateboard on a big cylinder. We do a lot of juggling and what we call object manipulation. So it's taking all kinds of different objects and moving them around in ways that don't seem natural or typical. So we explore a lot in our mixed circus classes. So then I'll also explain what a recreation therapist is. So when I came to Europe, nobody knew what a recreation therapist was. So we work to support navigating barriers that keep people from accessing and engaging in meaningful leisure. So when I found the circus and read more about what Galway Community Circus specifically does, it was kind of a really interesting move for me to explore what that could mean in a different setting. And then another perspective that I'll need to explain. So I'm Western Canadian. I sound American, but I am Canadian. And in Canada, we do a lot of learning about the understanding between the social models and the medical models. So sometimes some things I might say might not kind of be similar to maybe what my Irish counterparts are, like how they're using language. So I'm learning how we approach it in Ireland, but just to kind of give you some context that I'm coming with my Canadian perspective. So it might sound a little bit different, but I am open and trying to learn as fast as I can. We also use in Canada a lot of strengths-based language. For example, not saying things like, you can't do that. It's more like, you can do that with the support of A, B, or C, whatever the individual needs. And we also kind of focus on where people are at with person-centered language and identity-centered language. Over my time learning and studying in Canada, it has shifted. And you'll hear me use predominantly person-centered language, but I come from an autism center, and we've heard from their self-advocates that they prefer in Canada to be referred to as autistic individuals or autistic people. So I will use that language because I'm doing a general presentation, but just know that when I'm supporting an individual, I would check in with that individual about what language they prefer. So that is some context about me and where I'm going to go with this. So at Galway Community Circus, there are a bunch of things that we need to consider. Some of these items have been considering over the years, and some are new that a few new staff over the last couple of years have been bringing in that are really important, that we feel are really important to our development and improvement in the inclusion. So we need to consider that inclusion, equality, and diversity, it's an ongoing long-term journey. It's not something that you just implement and you're done. You got to keep working at it. And you need to work at it consistently and constantly, and you need to chip away at it bit by bit. So sometimes we get really hard on ourselves that we're not doing enough, and sometimes we're not doing enough, and we need to acknowledge that. But then it's good to reflect every year about the things that we are trying to do, the things that we're doing well, and identifying those gaps and figuring out what we need to tweak year after year. Something else we need to do is examine our organizational culture and make shifts around our understanding of what inclusion and disability really is. We've had lots of conversation about what an inclusive classroom should look like, ought to look like, could look like. And some of those conversations weren't happening before. So we're starting those conversations, and those are really important for organizations that want to start being more inclusive. One of the big things we've identified is a main goal that we've embedded into our strategic plan. And so you need to have a goal as an organization to help guide how you make decisions. So we collaborate with youth circuses from across Europe to work towards the idea of Circus for All. That's the goal, that's the mission, that's what's driving a lot of decisions that we're making moving forward. We are not there yet. We have a lot of work to do, but everyone is on board to put in the work and put in the effort, find the resources, and make those changes. Another thing that we need to understand about ourselves as an organization is our context. And that's why I spoke about my context coming in as a speaker. As an organization, context is everything. We offer group-based workshops and education programs. We're not proficient at one-to-one programs. We are strategically funded by a few key organizations, and we've committed to them to create certain actions around inclusion. So we need to make sure that we're working and prioritizing those and that those commitments make sense for the people that we're serving. We operate in Irish society and culture. Not everyone operates in an Irish society or culture. So there are considerations when you're in an organization around the world or moving into an organization around the world that you have to consider the cultural implications and what's valued in that culture. We're located in a historically lower socioeconomic neighborhood here in Galway City, but now we're understanding that that's shifting over time. And now we're working towards expanding our locations to add another location in an area city that doesn't have as much access to creative, artistic, and athletic programming. So making sure that you identify that and keep on top of that is important. Thank you. Our team is very multicultural. So English is a second language for many of our staff, and that's something that we need to consider as well. We can offer bursaries, but we're also very limited in how many we can offer. So we have the ability to create, relieve barriers there financially, but we can only do so much with the resources that we have. Our ability to keep our pricing lower than like other comparable activities relies quite heavily on two things. So the funding that we receive, and we have 3 Erasmus Plus tutors that join us every year. So that's our workforce for our classes, is we have some professional circus tutors, and then we have some volunteer individuals that are learning to be tutors. Some may have experience, some might not. So those are some considerations that we have. And then a really important thing that I always talk to groups about and organizations about is identifying your own biases as a person or as an organization and challenging your thought processes about those biases. And so one of the biases that I often run into in North America, and it might not necessarily be true for Europe or other parts of the world, is a lot of people say that they're experts in a lot of areas. I've worked in autism I worked with supporting autistic people for 8 years. I am not an expert. I'm informed and I have knowledge, but actually now that I've been out of working in that field for about 1.5 years, my knowledge is old and it's outdated, and I need to acknowledge that and be honest about that. I have staff that I would consider circus experts, but they also don't like that label of being an expert on it because they know there's room to grow. They know they don't know everything, so that expert label is a really challenging thing that I've seen, especially in North America, that needs to be reconsidered. On our something that I think our organization does really well in this area is that we have a board of directors that's intentionally made up of a diverse group of people, because a couple years ago, they realized that representation matters, and it really matters at the levels where decisions are being made. So we've got the top of the organization is represented by more diverse population than a lot of other organizations, which I think is really cool about Galway Community Circus. And it's also really important in the biases is to acknowledge what we don't know and be honest about it. And I think I kind of said that already, but that's an important piece to moving forward with exploring inclusion and what your organizations are going to do. So some things that we're currently doing at Galway Community Circus that I think is fantastic, and this was happening before I got there, youth voice is really encouraged and celebrated. Every single youth that is in our program has a say, and they can consent or not consent to stuff. We do really encourage any youth to try an activity at least once, but at the end of the day, if it's a no, and that's okay. Circuses, next week we're going to be doing all kinds of other activities, and maybe there'll be something that this individual is drawn to. And that's perfectly fine. Every term, our classes start with the creation of a group contract for each class, where each student is given an opportunity to contribute some ideas to this group contract about what they want to see in class, what they don't want to see in class, and to agree or disagree with some of the other ideas that are coming up. And that was a really neat thing that I saw in this organization. And they sit in a circle, they write it all down with crayons, and they plunk it up on the wall, and they add it and adjust it as they go. So that's a important thing to give the youth their voice so they can be heard. We actively teach people that failure is an important part of practicing to achieve improvement. And that's a hard thing that some social and cultures, like societies and cultures, really struggle with, that failure piece. We're shifting in that. Something that we're doing specifically is when we're shifting our language towards, instead of saying good job to every kid with every trick that they do, we're trying to train our tutors to say things more like, you're getting really good at that, or you're getting better at that every time you attempt it. Here's a specific thing that you could work on to get even better at it. Where we can, we provide additional support in classes. So typically there's a staff tutor and a volunteer tutor in all of our classes. But we do have a couple classes where we've added a third tutor, because I know that we have an individual that might need a little bit more support, because I've had conversations with their parents about it. There's something that I like try to do, and something that's new that I've introduced to the circus is every time I have a new family that sends us an inquiry about whether circus is right for their child, I try and set up a meeting with that family and the child. So if it's possible, I try and bring them in so I can give them a tour of the circus. I can explain the layout, how the class runs, and I can kind of physically walk them through. You come in, you take your shoes off, you take your socks off. Instantly, there's some sensory things there. We have some really loud things in the hall. And I just want to give that tour and give the child and the parent or the guardian the opportunity to ask as many questions as they can, so that family as a whole can decide for themselves if our programming, how it's set up currently, fits their needs, and it's going to be something that their child is going to find fun and engaging and fulfilling. And I realized as I was writing this that I haven't trained any of my staff how to do that. So that's an action that I need to work on going forward, is passing on that knowledge and that how-to and how easy it can be, and demonstrate that, because that's an important piece. Because often a parent will be like, ooh, I don't think this is the right time for us. And they have that power and autonomy and agency to make that decision for themselves based on the restrictions that we have with our programming. So some of the barriers that get in the way of us is always resources. We have the capacity, like I said, to add a couple extra volunteers to a few classes, but I don't have enough people to add a support worker in every single class. So that makes it really challenging to be able to offer support, like if someone needs a one-to-one support to really engage in a class. And often my volunteers that I come in, it's revolving, so my volunteers switch up every single year. So some of them might have experience with supporting someone one-to-one. They often don't, so then there's that learning curve to work through. So I don't have consistent people to provide that one-to-one support, which is a struggle and an important piece to start becoming more inclusive. The facilities we use are really out to date. That one's tragic. It's not a very accessible environment at all, which is really unfortunate. But we're working with the community center to try and find grants for them to do upgrades and stuff like that, like our front door, which doesn't have an automatic button, which seems like a super simple, essential piece just isn't there. So that's one of the first things we're working on. It also takes us a lot of time because my staff are circus tutors. It can take them a long time to do the research and practice how to modify and adapt circus skills and learnings to meet the needs of an individual. And we've been very reactive thus far because we have a lot of workload. There's a lot happening. We're a nonprofit. We're a charity. There's a lot of things going on. And it would be really nice to get to a point where I could give my staff the time to take a look at what they're doing up in Derry in Northern Ireland for a blind group that's learning to juggle. It's a really neat concept, and it is possible, and schools are doing it. We just don't have the capacity to be proactive on that, which is something that we need to work on. So I'll fire off some practical, theoretical solutions to some of these approaches. So if you're not sure where to start, I'll just say this one real quick. I'm out of time. If you're not sure where to start, write down what you're currently doing, identify if it's sustainable, train all your other staff on how to do it, and then embed these skills into your onboarding annual training. And that's kind of where we're currently at, is creating that document. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Brady. I'm going to take the example that you outlined there during your presentation. I'm not going to say good job. I'm going to say thank you so much. I feel a lot more informed about the work of GCC and how circus arts and community arts can be more inclusive. So thank you. I'm going to introduce our second presenter, Nina Portolan, who's got a pre-recorded presentation that we're going to be watching. Nina Portolan is a 26-year-old university student, para-athlete, and disability and human rights activist from Belgrade in Serbia. Nina is a para-athlete competing in para-karate and has been part of the Serbian national team since 2018, when she also started advocating for access to sports for disabled children and adults in Serbia. She has been a member of the board of directors in the Sports Association of Persons with Disabilities of Belgrade since 2021 and achieved her highest athletic achievement the same year, winning third place at the European Karate and Para-Karate Championships in Croatia. In Serbia, Nina speaks about the impact of sports on her life, the position of women and girls in sports, and inclusion at various events. Currently, Nina is a member of the European Network on Independent Living Youth Network and represents ENIL within the EDF Youth Committee. I'm going to hand over to Nina now. I think.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be with you today. I'm Nina, and I will be talking about access to sports and recreation for disabled children and youth. I am a disability and human rights activist, an advocate, and a para-athlete, also a daughter of former athletes, which is something I want you to remember throughout my story. In 2020, while I was a volunteer at the European Network on Independent Living, I had the opportunity to write a contribution on Article 30 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities for the High Commissioner of Human Rights of the United Nations. A year later, in 2021, I was part of the 12th Disability Law Summer School in Galway, and we, as a group, wrote recommendations for the implementation of Article 30. Looking back on these two documents, I had the opportunity to identify three key topics I want to reflect on today: accessibility, non-discrimination, and education, as well as an overarching theme of the importance and impact of sports and recreation for disabled people in general, but especially for children and youth. Article 30, or specifically paragraph 5, which guarantees disabled people's access to participate on an equal basis as non-disabled people in recreational, leisure and sports activities is linked to Article 9 on accessibility and Article 24 of education of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. These two in turn link it or can be linked to all other provisions of the Convention. When speaking about accessibility, I want to reflect on subsection C of paragraph 5, which highlights the importance of access to venues where events are being held. It guarantees accessibility in a way that is defined by General Comment 2 of the United Nations, meaning that accessibility refers to the ability of disabled people to participate fully and equally in society. This means that sports facilities should be accessible for athletes and spectators, along with giving them the opportunity to access qualified coaches and adequate equipment. Information about accessibility must be readily available, and no disabled person should be put in an uncomfortable position for asking about provisions on accessibility. In reality, information about recreational and sports activities is often hard to find. The physical access to venues is limited, and accessible formats such as those for persons with intellectual impairments are most often not even considered. The biggest obstacles to overcoming these issues are lack of funding for adequate infrastructure, such as public transport, as well as a lack of public awareness on these topics. Insufficient access to personal assistance impacts participation as well. Especially impacted are children and youth, who are often not eligible for personal assistance. The Belgrade Association for Sport for Persons with Disabilities, for example, has existed for the past 50 years. However, this wasn't something my parents knew when I was young, and for this reason, I had no sense of direction or information about how to get involved in sports. When I was 9 years old, 10 different horse riding clubs turned me away before I could find one that would take me and try to make it work. But they also didn't have accessible equipment or any specific training in working with disabled children. They only had some good intentions, which I'm grateful for, but at the same time today realize aren't a systemic or a good enough solution. Subsection A of paragraph 5 and subsection B notes the importance of disabled people being able to access both mainstream, meaning those activities that aren't designed specifically for disabled people, as well as disability-specific sports and recreational activities, as well as disciplines. This means that persons with disabilities should also have the choice to compete in both disability-specific and mainstream sports, and that adequate adaptations and guidelines should be provided for competition at all levels. It is also encouraged that competitions be held simultaneously with those of non-disabled athletes. Paralympic committees in all countries where I researched this topic promote sports on a national level. However, in most cases, there should be more focus on mainstream sports in the adult and young adult populations, while children don't have enough access to disability-specific sports. If a competition will follow the same structure and be held simultaneously with those of non-disabled athletes depends solely on the sport, and issues arise due to lack of adequate adaptations and guidelines for inclusive competitions at all levels. This results in an overall smaller number of competitions for disabled athletes compared to non-disabled counterparts. And also, when competitions aren't being held simultaneously, it prevents any close contact between athletes, therefore undermining the social component of sports. For children, this aspect is even worse, as their chances for competitive sports are almost non-existent, and the focus in childhood is mostly on rehabilitation. To this day, I myself am faced with prejudice whenever I try to compete. Either we are, as disabled athletes, inspirational, or we have it too hard or too easy instead of just allowing our participation. So how does anyone really expect a child to stay active or even achieve success in sports later on if they are very start of exposure to physical activity is either in a highly medicalized setting or filled with obstacles that are too big for a child's dreams. It is unfortunate that disabled athletes are to this day seen as a novelty and not held to the same standards and respect as non-disabled athletes are. Speaking of equality, equity, and non-discrimination, as it is guaranteed in Article 5 of the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, both previously mentioned subsections A and B highlights the importance that a disabled person's participation in sports should be given the same respect as a non-disabled person would get, and that participation is encouraged to the fullest extent possible. This means that there is also an obligation to break stereotypes and biases against disabled people in these areas of life. In reality, the attitudes of those who facilitate involvement in sports and control funds and resources can create powerful barriers for youth in sports. Issues of discrimination based on gender, age, race, or other grounds are always enhanced when they intersect with disability. The tendency to link sports to rehabilitation is also discriminatory. And accessing only hydrotherapy, for example, instead of swimming lessons, stems from the medical model and creates even more stigma. I have experienced this myself. Norway's shadow report on Article 30, which was presented to the UN CRPD Committee in 2019, states that a lot of barriers also stem from underestimation of coping skills, expertise, and prejudice in the surroundings of disabled people. Women and girls with disabilities face discrimination on multiple levels, and especially in sports. And this is why I want to talk about real-life role models and representation at all levels. It took me a really long time and careful introspection to understand who I was as a woman and as an athlete in combat sports, which is typically not considered feminine. It took even longer to truly internalize the belief that I could be strong and it didn't mean I wasn't feminine, and that I could have the confidence to use a wheelchair in sports even after previously being told my whole life that I had to make my body work as normal as it possibly could. Today, I try to be a role model to little kids. I try to teach the little girls that they can be strong and confident and girly and proud and be different all at the same time, because I know how much I needed that. So a special plea goes out to those of you who work with little girls to remember my words. And we should never forget that for children, everything can be shaped by their experiences in school. So finally, I want to reflect on Article 24 of the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is on education, and subsection D of paragraph 5 of Article 30, which highlights the importance of disabled children having access to participate in play, recreation, and sports, both within and outside schools. Children shouldn't only be able to observe or comment on the activity, but they should be able to participate in it the same way a non-disabled child would. We also must not forget that the right to play is protected under the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, and it provides every child the freedom to participate. The support of teachers and other staff is crucial in this regard, and playgrounds as well as sports facilities should always be constructed with universal design principles in mind. In most countries, there is some form of guarantee for disabled children and youth to be enrolled in mainstream education, which includes physical education. However, there is a stark discrepancy between the policies in place and reality. In Hungary, for example, most disabled children are to this day enrolled in special education settings. In these settings, they have access to sports, however, all of their activities as well as competitions are segregated. In mainstream education, children with physical impairments are most often exempt from physical education. This, to me, as well, is wasting the power of sports, because sports is a very powerful tool for social goals, inclusion, human rights education, and the understanding of equity. Another barrier for disabled children and youth engaging in sports and recreational activities outside of school is their cost, because they are always or almost always significantly more expensive than the same activities for non-disabled children. For young adults who want to pursue a career, being physical education teachers, coaches, or trainers, things are very different between countries. In some, this is possible without any discrimination, while in others, including Serbia, unfortunately, while there are some people who have succeeded in this career path, it remains largely inaccessible. The lack of inclusion is mostly present due to lack of education of teaching staff, as well as inaccessibility of facilities and lack of funding. Some courses have been introduced at certain universities, which teach how to teach sports to disabled people. However, these courses stem from the medical model of disability and are still geared towards people who will be working in segregated educational settings. I will be one of the first karate coaches who is also a disabled person in my country and regionally. I am proud of that, but maybe not for the reasons you may think of. I am most proud of it because I have this little girl in my karate class whose eyes light up when I approach her to teach her something, and another, a teenager, who no one ever believed in, and who, thanks to her involvement in sports, has blossomed into the most confident person I know in my karate class. She is the one I trust most to be able to handle the group of 30 small children if one of the coaches or assistant coaches, such as myself, needs to step out. Further on, for both professional athletes and projects targeting disabled youth who want to be professional athletes, the distribution of public grants as well as recognition and representation in the media is unequal. Only athletes who receive recognition on world, continental, or Paralympic level are granted monetary prizes. This, for most athletes, isn't enough for them to stay in their federations, as they don't have continuous source of income from sports. Disabled people are also very rarely considered outside of their roles as competitors, and this is only in adulthood. While they can be part of their associations or clubs' boards, INIL to this day has no knowledge of disabled people being truly considered in other roles and especially on higher levels. For me, this needs to change because it goes back to representation and role models. And it matters that we see another person pursuing a career path we may want when the time comes to decide these things. It is important to never forget that sports and recreation isn't something secondary to other rights, because the benefits of sport include improving people's physical and mental health, as well as developing social and emotional skills. Disabled or not, for youth, sports can be means of escape, a distraction, as well as a means of connection and creating bonds in their community. It teaches them to trust their body and trust their skills, which is very important. Being involved in a sport can allow a shift in the community for those with disabilities to access services more easily, as well as a shift of the thinking of non-disabled parts of the community, because they will understand the principles of equity and meaningful participation. Society must also acknowledge the fact that not every person wants to be a competitive athlete. Avoiding ableist attitudes that prioritize competition over participation is very important, because the right to participate encompasses both participation on an amateur and professional level. The Olympic and Paralympic trope linked to inspiration are very toxic and harmful. We can't all be Paralympians, and it shouldn't matter. As the late Stella Young said in one of her amazing speeches on inspiration, which I often reference, we are not there to simply be someone's inspiration. And I do this all the time and say it and repeat it when I try to explain away the comparisons I'm given. I have learned, for example, that a runner with a running blade is faster than an able-bodied runner. But maybe some other disabled person may not ever reach the same thresholds for competitive sports, or may not even want to. And both of those things are okay. Success in sports, as with anything, depends on opportunity, talent, and determination. I regularly train with non-disabled athletes, and I sometimes compete in mainstream competitions or present my skills as a guest. I will occasionally go against a non-disabled friend just for fun. But I believe in equity over equality and that we should level the playing field in both directions because it will have a huge impact on the next generation. I still vividly remember the empty stands I faced during the European Para-Karate and Karate Championships in 2018. At that time, the only people in the room were judges, other competitors, coaches, and our families. The only applause, although it felt like the ground was shaking, came from them. And in 2021, only one non-disabled athlete supported me and my teammates when we were competing. So while I do believe that things are changing and that children who participate in sports and recreational activities today will have a slightly easier road, we have a long way to go. The belief of those who dare to say let's try instead of limiting us will help us to see ourselves and our communities differently. With the support of even one person, I will be confident enough to tell every child that one day, sooner than they may think, they will see themselves very differently, in a different light in spite of all the challenges. Sports has built a lot of who I am today, and I have learned to laugh through every fall and every failure. I am grateful for all of the connections and possibilities it has given me. Thankfully, Enil also recognizes my strengths and they have allowed me to grow. I was a representative of Enil at one event on sports and youth recently, and one evening as we were playing wheelchair basketball, even though I was the only disabled participant, I started reflecting on my identity even more because I realized that was the first time I was allowed to play ball sports, and I was 26 years old. So if I leave you with any idea today, it would be to create opportunities, because youth has a lot more power than we are often given credit for. So let's build enough opportunities so we don't raise another generation of people who have to wait until adulthood to try their hand in any sport. Thank you.
Gosh, thank you so much, Nina. That was fantastic. She's going to be joining us live remotely for the Q&A in a short while as well. And we'll get to ask her some questions about her experiences too.